All right, here we go. These are the damning stats. So in a March review by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 351 donor cases were examined. In 103 of them, patients showed signs of brain or nerve activity after being declared dead. 28 donors may have been fully alive when the surgical team began procurement. These cases are linked to the rising use of what is known as donation after circulatory death. If you ever are in a hospital and you hear someone refer to a doctor or a nurse or an orderly as someone refer to DCD, that's what they're talking about. Donation after circulatory death, where the heart has stopped, but brain activity might persist. DCD procedures have doubled between 2021 to 2024 as hospitals scramble to meet the rising demand for organs. Let me say that again. 28 people may have had their organs harvested while still alive. They were declared dead by a stopwatch, not biology. Now, you all know, for those of you who are the regular guests of the Wake Up America show, if you're watching us for the first time, you don't know anything about me. I'm Austin Petersen. I'm the host of the show. Glad to meet you. Glad you're here. Hope you'll stick around and come back. Topics are not always so gruesome. And if you know me, you know that I'm not the type of person to go out there, bring out your dead, fear-mongering, constantly trying to terrify people about threats to their life or the threats to their liberty, yes. But I don't engage in a lot of nonsense fear-mongering, even though it might make me a lot more money. I know for a fact that if you terrify the crap out of people, you make a lot of money. So I try not to add on to the pile of the crap of humanity by creating shows and content that is solely designed to scare the crap out of people for no good reason. But when there's a good reason, when I find some bit of information that I think you need to know, I absolutely am going to bring it to your attention. And this is something that, to me, was something you might have read out of a Tales from the Crypt novel from like the 1940s or, graphic novel. Here are the real stories. Listen to this. This is a case in Kentucky. A 50-year-old man began shaking and crying on the operating table just before his heart was removed. He responded to verbal commands. The staff finally stopped, but only after it was clear he was aware. So this is a case of a man in Kentucky laying on the operating table. They're opening him up. They're getting ready to remove his heart. and then they realize the guy's still alive, like functionally alive. And they were going to continue with the procedure to remove his heart. But the only reason that they didn't is because they said, wiggle your finger or move your big toe. And if he hadn't been able to do it, if he had been awake and alive when they'd done that, they would have removed his organs while he was still alive. This is another case. This was in Texas. A 46-year-old man gasped for breath as his chest was being opened. The hospital, instead of rushing him back to ICU immediately, delayed the treatment to clarify the paperwork. In other words, they knew the guy was an organ donor. This is in Texas, 46-year-old man. They're opening up his chest and he's gasping for breath. And instead of immediately being like, okay, this guy's alive, let's get him back to the intensive care. No, they said, let's just check with the paperwork here. Whoopsie. Drew Van Runkle says, admit it, you're worried about your mustache being harvested if you get in a car wreck. True. Don't touch my mustache. It's delicious. It's beautiful. Another case story of a man from Ohio, a teenage boy from Ohio, whose circulatory death time had been calculated down to the minute. In other words, they were waiting for this guy. They had looked at the DCD and they had done the timing. And the teenage boy, his circulatory death time was calculated down to the moment. They had like the stopwatch on. They were waiting. Right, just like somebody's like off to the races. They're like, okay, we're going to get this kid's organs, right? This one's going to be really good. We're going to make a lot of money on this one, right? During the procedure, he showed brainstem activity. And one nurse reportedly said he twitched, his eyes fluttered. Thank you to Brian Jottis, who went to forlibertyshop.com this morning. He's excited to be on the show today. Thanks for watching, Brian. And this story here, this Ohio teen, whose circulatory death time had been calculated down to the minute, being prepped for organ removal. His eyes are fluttering. He's twitching. They're still waiting for him to die, right? 55 medical professionals across 19 states confirmed to reporters that they've seen at least one case where a donor wasn't truly gone before procurement began. In other words, this is not something that is happening in just Kentucky, in Ohio, in West Virginia. This is happening across the country, okay? 55 medical professionals spoke on the record to the New York Times across 19 states that they have all at least seen one case where a donor wasn't truly gone before the procurement began. It's like the old urban legend of being buried alive, except in this case, they're not giving you a bell to ring. They're handing your heart to someone else. Stories like these have emerged as the transplant system has increasingly turned to a type of organ removal called donation after circulatory death. Remember that. It accounted for 1/3 of all donations last year, about 20,000 organs. That's triple the number from 5 years earlier. So we've tripled the amount of organ donors in 5 years. If you're a big fan of organ donation, you might say, oh, great, we've tripled the number. Well, it's because, how are they doing it? It's because they have now lowered the standards for what we consider death. Not good. Most donated organs in the United States come from people who are brain dead. Being brain dead is an irreversible state, and people like that are kept on machines only to maintain their organs. But circulatory death donation is different. These patients are on life support. They're often in comas. Their prognoses are more of a medical judgment call, right? They are alive with some brain activity, but doctors have determined that they are near death and they won't recover. If relatives agree to a donation, doctors withdraw life support and wait for the patient's heart to stop. This has to happen within an hour or two for the organs to be considered viable. After the person is declared dead, the surgeons then go in. The New York Times found that some organ procurement organizations, these are nonprofits in each state that have federal contracts to coordinate transplants. They are aggressively pushing circulatory death donors and pushing families and doctors towards surgery. Hospitals are responsible for patients up to the moment of death, but some are allowing procurement organizations to influence treatment decisions. Again, 55 medical workers in 19 states told the New York Times that they had all witnessed at least one disturbing case of donation after circulatory death. The Department of Health and Human Services has flagged multiple hospitals and organ procurement organizations, they call them OPOs, organ procurement organizations, for they flagged them or cited them for sloppy neurological assessments. They're not taking their time to ensure that the patient is in fact dead, mislabeled causes of death, and ambiguous consent forms. One major OPO, it's called Network for Hope. They operate in Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia. They're actually now facing federal decertification if they fail to reform. The federal oversight body, which is called UNOS, United Network for Organ Sharing. God, it's just some macabre stuff. They call the findings horrific and have pledged a total system overhaul. Health and Human Services have now ordered a mandatory 5-minute wait after cardiac death before any organ retrieval. So they've got to wait 5 minutes after your heart stops at a minimum before they can remove your organs. Any staff member in the room has the veto power to stop a procedure. These are the new rules. They now have improved death certification protocols, standardized consent forms, and incident reporting. The Department of Health and Human Services has also now ordered national tracking of stoppages where staff or families objected due to signs of life. It's the ethical version of a seatbelt. Too late for the crash victims who already went through the windshield. Between January and June of 2025, 24,816 transplants were performed. 12,044 donors recovered, 8,605 from deceased donors. Over 105,000 Americans remain in the transplant wait list. An average of 13 people die every day waiting for a new heart, kidney, or liver. But here's the kicker. True brain death only occurs in 3% of hospital deaths, meaning hospitals are increasingly relying on these DCD protocols where death is declared by heart stoppage, but the brain may still be functioning. I mean, this isn't just a bureaucratic glitch, right? This is human beings on a conveyor belt. It's a system that's chasing numbers, donors turned into data points, and families grieving someone who may not actually have passed yet. After a 2024 AP report revealed a near miss case, 170 people per day deregistered from organ donor lists in one state alone. Experts are worried that public trust is now unraveling and that donor registrations nationwide will plummet unless immediate and visible reforms are implemented. Amy J. Eves, she's a nurse in the chat, says, "This is bizarre. I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like this. I'm only one nurse in one ICU, but I know our process." Amy, if you'd like to take a look at that article, it was published the 20th of July here, so 2 days ago, over at the New York Times. The title of the article, "A Push for More Organ Transplants is Putting Donors at Risk," is the name of the article. People across the United States have endured rushed or premature attempts to remove their organs. Some were gasping, crying, or showing other signs of life. Listen to this. Last spring at a small Alabama hospital, a team of transplant surgeons prepared to cut into Misty Hawkins. The clock was ticking. Her organs wouldn't be usable for much longer. Days earlier, she had been a vibrant 42-year-old with a playful sense of humor and a love for the Thunder Beach motorcycle rally. But after Miss Hawkins choked while eating and fell into a coma, her mother decided to take her off life support and donate her organs. She was removed from a ventilator and after 103 minutes declared dead. A surgeon made an incision in her chest and sawed through her breastbone. That's when the doctors discovered that her heart was beating. She appeared to be breathing. They were slicing into Miss Hawkins while she was still alive. In New Mexico, a woman was subjected to days of preparation for donation, even after her family said that she seemed to be regaining consciousness, which she eventually did. They were prepping her for days for organ donation. She was alive. She was like, "I'm not dead yet." "Yes, you are. Get on the cart." "I don't want to go on the cart." Sorry to make light of the situation, but in Florida, a man cried and bit on his breathing tube, but was still withdrawn from life support. In West Virginia, can you imagine that? Like they're trying to pull the tube out of his mouth, and he's like, Jesus. In West Virginia, doctors were appalled. Doctors were appalled when coordinators asked a paralyzed man coming off sedatives in an operating room for consent to remove his organ. Wait, record scratch. What? Doctors were appalled because the nonprofit people, quote unquote, nonprofit people, were there to receive and consume, I assume, receive his organs. The man was coming off sedatives in the operating room, and the nonprofit people were asking him if they could take his organs. This is what's going on in the United States. This is happening. If you want to check my sources, please do so. Again, this all came from a nationwide study. And the title of the article you can find available now is printed 2 days ago. It's available at the New York Times. I know you guys are like, "No, God, please." It's the New York Times. Every once in a while, they get a banger. A push for more organ transplants is putting donors at risk. People across the United States have endured rushed or premature attempts to remove their organs. Some were gasping, crying, or showing other signs of life. Now, I looked up the rest of the story from Miss Hawkins from Alabama, and she was eating lunch at home when she choked on a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Can you believe it? Her stepfather called 911, and doctors removed the obstruction, but her brain suffered oxygen deprivation that left her comatose on a ventilator. Her mother raced to the hospital from her job. Doctors said Miss Hawkins would never again breathe on her own and gave her mother 72 hours to decide whether to move her to a nursing home or withdraw life support. Miss Johnson did not want her daughter to suffer. She asked about organ donation. She said she wanted some good to come from the tragedy. Miss Hawkins Alabama has a procurement organization called Legacy of Hope. It ran tests on her, chose recipients, and then arranged for an outside company called Transmedics to send surgeons to remove the organs. Miss Hawkins was wheeled to an operating room, and her family said the final goodbye. Flowers Hospitals is a level 3 trauma center, meaning it lacks some of the capabilities of larger institutions. It rarely handles circulatory death donations. Miss Hawkins was one of just 3 attempts last year. In the operating room, a hospital doctor took Miss Hawkins off the ventilator and gave her drugs for comfort. The doctor declared her dead 103 minutes later, near the outer limit of organ viability. So they declared that she was dead, okay? She's gone. The doctor said it. All right, the surgeons entered the room. They began operating after a 5-minute waiting period. All circulatory death donations require a waiting period to ensure the heart does not restart. Almost immediately, they saw Miss Hawkins' heart moving. All right, the records reviewed by the New York Times characterized the movement differently. Listen to this. The Legacy of Hope called it reanimation, which, as did Flowers. They said that the heart fluttered, but the Health and Human Services review of the case said the heart was beating strongly enough to pump blood through her body. Record from the procurement organization also noted subsequent gasping respirations. Heart was beating. She's breathing. It's one of the most terrifying things I've ever heard. A coordinator said her daughter's organs had not been used. This is just crazy stuff. 5 doctors with expertise in critical care independently reviewed Ms. Hawkins' records, said it was all but impossible that her heart restarted after the waiting period. Research has found that when people are taken off life support, their hearts do not restart.